Okay, everyone. I think it's time we got underway. We have almost 30 participants again this morning. So I think we could get started. And I'd just like to say once again, welcome to everybody and thank you for joining us today. I think we had a very useful discussion yesterday, and overnight we have been thinking about how we can take this forward today. As you can see from the agenda which was circulated, the idea was to have an open and plenary discussion this morning, chaired by the chair of our HOPS group, Ipia, who spoke to us yesterday. What we hope is that we'll have contributions primarily from our government statisticians and the NSOs. And what we took from yesterday's meeting was that there really is a need for more coordination amongst our development partners and more engagement with the NSOs. There were a couple of comments made that surveys and activities were going on in countries by development partners, and they weren't always engaged with the NSOs. They might be engaged with their own sector focus, but not necessarily with the NSOs themselves. And I think it's quite clear that the NSOs in each country do have a responsibility to make sure that all statistical work is undertaken in a robust and statistically sound manner, and therefore it is important that that everyone engages with them, even if perhaps they're not fully required to do anything. It's still important that they're involved. So we have therefore put forward a number of points that we think could provide the focus for our discussion this morning. The first one is how existing data collections are being accommodated by the NSOs, and what changes and modifications might be envisaged for the surveys as a consequence of the pandemic, who is supporting the various surveys that are going on, and when are the surveys likely to be in the field. I think these are important issues for the planning of statistical work in all of our countries. Then more specifically on the rapid assessment data collections that we've heard about from a number of agencies yesterday, I think it's important that we all understand what additional surveys are agreed to by the country and development partners, what practical approaches will be developed to address data collection complexities when we're trying to do this in a short space of time, and dealing specifically with the impacts of the pandemics. The approach to finalizing the survey questionnaires and the inputs from the countries, because I think there's clearly a lot of interest in doing specific surveys with very focused questionnaires, but we need to make sure that the NSOs are engaged in this process so that country priorities can also be incorporated into any surveys that are going to be done. And again, it's a question of who will be supporting the surveys, how will they be funded, and how will they be managed at the country level. And again, when are these surveys likely to occur? And we've obviously heard from the World Bank that surveys are currently in the field in PNG and the Solomon Islands, and we've also heard from ILO, World Food Programme, and UNICEF that have very specific plans for surveys in the coming weeks and months. So what we felt was that there was perhaps a need to try and bring this all together in a set of dialogues, if you like, between partners and NSOs at the country level. And we'd like to suggest that this might be a way forward to improve the coordination of all the work that is going on. The other point that we mentioned, that was mentioned yesterday, and something that we mentioned from the SDD side, was the use of administrative data where this is known to be available, but is often not published by governments and by other agencies that collect data on a regular basis. And here we're talking about tax revenues, government finance data, employment data that is often known by the provident funds in countries, the power generation figures that we collected by power authorities but are often not published, and similar data like that that can provide really useful lead indicators of what's happening in the macro economy. And I think it would be very useful if we can hear from NSOs on whether they see this as something that can be improved to make this data available for monitoring purposes. I mean, it's important in the current situation with the pandemic and how that's affecting the economy, but it could also be very useful on a longer term basis just to have a better indication of what economic performance is happening in countries, rather than having to wait a long time for the GDP data, which sometimes takes several months to be compiled. So those are some of the thoughts that we had overnight, and we have shared these with our chair for this morning here. So perhaps now if I could hand over to Ipia and invite him to carry on and lead the discussion. And what I've said before is that we would really like to hear from the NSOs primarily, because this meeting is specifically and primarily for the benefit of the NSOs to know what's going on and to have a better idea. But clearly we hope that the development partners and agencies will contribute to the discussion so that we can have a really useful discourse this morning. If there are questions, please feel free to put those on the chat. And I would just remind you to please keep your mics on mute unless you speak. And also it's suggested that you don't have your videos on unless you're also speaking, so that we don't use up too much bandwidth, and hopefully we can keep the system live as we did yesterday. So having said that, thanks again for joining us this morning, and I'll invite Ipia to take over from here. Thanks very much.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can. Yes, we can hear you, Ipia. Yep, carry on, please.
Yep. My connection is not very good, so I'm just gonna keep the camera off.
Yep. Okay. Fine.
Yep. So firstly, I would just like to say welcome everyone and say good morning to all, especially to my fellow Pacific Island statistician brothers and sisters. So, in short, we find ourselves and our systems being tested, especially with regards to our catch cry, evidence-based decision making. And so amidst this global crisis we find ourselves, and I ask, what can be more purposeful today in testing our capacity to collaborate, coordinate, and cooperate than what COVID-19 presents us today? I know that we have made several excuses on several occasions, putting the blame on the government partners, lack of funding, political will in our big talk. But today we have the opportunity to walk that talk. So let's put our reputations on the line again, once again, and above all, our integrity. As the saying goes, this is where the metal meets the meat. But anyway, again, today, as David has outlined, I hope everyone has had the chance to think about it overnight. After receiving the email from Kemueli and your contributions, we look forward to all your contributions today. So I'll that's I'll just keep it short because we have a short time period in order to try and get everything discussed, talk about everything, and get as much information as possible from everyone. So that's it from me, and I don't have the agenda with me, so I'll ask David if he can guide us just through these first sessions and how the structure of the discussion, how to structure the discussions for today. As David has said, it is important that we hear from all the statistics officers first, then we'll hand it over to the development partners and other key players as well. So how do you propose we start, David?
Thanks, Ipia. Well, what I'd like to invite each of our government statisticians to, as it were, respond to the suggestions that have been made that we should somehow facilitate a roundtable discussion at each individual country level to develop, as it were, a plan for the collection of critical data on the pandemic impacts, so that we can actually facilitate each NSO to have a clear idea of who is doing what and when, and how that will support each individual sector across the economy, so that we can actually make sure that the NSO is at the center of the data collection on the impacts of the pandemic on the economy, and that the NSO is also the central point for sharing the data around the individual countries, to the governments, to the individual sectors, to CSOs and other interested parties, and also to share the data with the partner agencies that are actually going to be assisting in developing policies and responses to the pandemic. And obviously across the whole spectrum of the sectors, the health sectors, the employment sectors, gender issues, and so on. We need to get focus on each of these. So each country needs to undertake some survey work that will focus on each of these issues. But as I've said before, it all needs to be coordinated so that we're not getting duplication, respondent burdens are not too high, and we're not overstretching the capacity of the NSO to be engaged. So the idea is, would NSOs find it useful to have a national roundtable discussion with partners to set a plan for data collection? So I'd like to invite each of the NSOs that are on board with us this morning to speak briefly to their thoughts on that particular issue. So maybe we can invite Kemueli from Fiji to open the discussion on that, because Fiji, I think, is further advanced in its national surveys and national data gathering than many other countries, and there may be lessons to be learned from Fiji on how this has gone, where the challenges have been, and how those challenges were dealt with. So Kemueli, would you please like to comment on that? Thanks.
Thank you, David. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you colleagues around the region with regards to what we have been carrying out here in Fiji. At the moment, what I would like to share is that we haven't conducted any special or specific survey with regards to COVID-19 impact assessment. There has been an assessment done by ministry level, which is the Ministry of Employment and Industry Relations. They have conducted a nationwide a survey just to ascertain the level of unemployment, and also the survey was conducted to target those companies that have closed down. That is specifically for employment and employees. There are a few NGOs that have come on board to assist with that survey. From the Statistics Office, we had assisted with the issuance of tablets, and also the designing of their questionnaire so that it can be used in the tablet to collect all those information. From our end, it's business as usual. We have been distributing our surveys through our Economic Statistics Division, the establishment surveys that has been sent out, is scheduled to be sent out at the end of this month, the 30th of June. And the survey has used as a norm, it's to be due in the month. However, with all the statistical releases that we have undertaken since the COVID-19, we have aligned ourselves to what the UNSD had advised all NSOs in terms of disseminating statistics, and also to be part of the release is the impact of such with regards to our release. The first one that we had undertaken was the tourism earnings, the release on tourism earnings, whereby we had mentioned out of the 76 hotels that were in the frame, only 26 had responded. And we have done our calculation in accordance to the respondents, and have also highlighted the lack of information from the rest that were part of the 76 in the frame. None of them, either they were closed or were not in a position to respond to the survey. In addition to what I'm sharing with you this morning, last week we had a discussion with Australian Bureau of Statistics on our rolling 3-year program. That again, we had specifically requested that if they could assist us, as we had observed in their releases that they have incorporated COVID-19 into their assessment and releases. So we would like to do a similar assessment with regards to assessing the impact of COVID-19. And that's still in discussion at the moment with ABS. Has highlighted by David this morning. Yes, I do agree with a roundtable discussion with donor partners, has to have a consistent way of collecting such statistics, even though it would have been at different levels at the regional level. But that would be the way forward, especially for NSOs in the region to be in a position to measure the impact of COVID-19, whether it's nationwide or a sector approach. That will be a point of discussion during the roundtable. That's what I wanted to share with you, David, this morning, and my colleague around the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kemueli. Perhaps I can just put a question to you. How have you managed the coordination of all the work that is going on? Is there a coordinating body in Fiji that is actually responsible for making sure that all the work that's being done by agencies, by sectors and so on, that it is being coordinated and the information is being disseminated?
Thank you, David. The coordination part, it's still with the Minister for Health in terms of coordination on COVID-19. On gathering information, that would be just through the Fiji Bureau of Statistics requesting information through surveys and administrative sources. it's, as I've mentioned earlier, there's no coordination, but just business as usual in terms of distributing the questionnaire according to the time frame that it's supposed to be distributed. And by then we would know the level of the impact in terms of the response rate. But as a coordination role among ministry, the Ministry of Health is doing it from the health perspective and not anything to do with data collection.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much. I should perhaps have just mentioned earlier on that although you can see my name on the participants list, I am here with Epeli, our director, and also Mike Sharp, who is on the control panel. So if you have any problems with your Zoom connection, Mike is the one that will be sorting it, and we'll hear from Epeli shortly. So let's move to the next government statistician, and perhaps I can see that we have Samoa online. Perhaps Ali Moore, if you're there, perhaps we could ask you to give your perspective from Samoa, please.
Good morning. This is Leota. We apologize that Ali Momua is also engaged in one of the meetings, but I think Samoa can provide comments later on. I think after the senior government statisticians, please. Thank you, David.
Okay, thanks, Leota. We'll come back to you later. I can see that we have a statistics here, but I'm not quite sure who's behind that.
That's Viliami.
That Viliami. Okay, Viliami, could I invite you to provide a few comments on the issues that we've raised so far, please?
Thank you, David. I'm here with our senior management team. Might say something on behalf of the government statisticians, and we will later on provide collective thoughts on the issues that has been raised. However, I also wear the hat of a method board member, or to be specific, the deputy chair for the method board. I hear the word coordination that has been starting to discuss from the early beginning, and I think it's very crucial that we think about the coordination amongst the. You hear me, David? Hello.
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear, Viliami. Yep, and we can see you as well.
Oh, do you want me to start again, or just
No, you're fine. You're fine, and you're all looking good.
Thank you. We hope that we'll look slim in the screen. The coordination in thinking about the governance of our statistics method board, mindful of the heavy workload that we have in terms of catching up with the demand from the SDGs and our national frameworks and all those areas. And now we have to face the pandemic, which is kind of tricky in a way that is, we are not sure when it's going to be finishing and how we can be respond to such complexities of that the pandemic is bringing to us. With that, I think, as I've seen the agenda, we have to look at ourselves, and also we have to look at a compulsory exercise for the Pacific, I guess. A separate exercise to assess the impact of the COVID-19. I think what is happening now, there's a lot of agencies and a lot of hands are starting to mobilize initiatives within the Pacific. As we all know, the World Bank is doing the work with the PNG and also the Solomon Islands. We also know the United Nations has also have some initiatives. But we learn from other countries as well. The US Census has been conducting a household house survey. We also learn from different agencies that are conducting household and financial impact of the pandemic to the households and also the economy itself. So we might think of enterprise surveys or facility-based surveys. We might think of the impact on the households, the businesses, but it all depends on how we contextually think it's appropriate for the countries. I knew that, I've just read a report this morning that Tuvalu is getting an aid of 40 US dollars, I think, per month for all the households. I'm saying this on behalf of the coordination because if it is to do with all the Pacific Islands, we have to think of all of us as a group, and then we have to think about our contextual appropriateness to what type of collection that we do for the COVID-19. How are we going to, and I think maybe this discussion is to learn the lesson, but we still face a lot of problems with trying to coordinate nationally the national statistical system. And I'm sure that some of our own national statistical office might face the same or similar issues. And that leads to what has been raised up for the administrative data. If we think we need administrative data, we have to tackle our NSS to be upfront and effective running. So there are things that we are still working on and looking at our own national priorities. As you know, that we have agencies within Tonga that has been mobilizing different initiatives. For example, our custom has a lot of exception for the duty. We have fisheries initiatives that they lower the cost of fish. We have bank deferral loans for people who have income affected by the COVID-19. We have a lot of initiatives by finance that they provide compensation for those who have income loss. They have provided monetary fund for our students overseas, especially those who are privately studied. There's a lot of initiatives, and I cannot read them all from here, but that's outside what we're doing here in office. But I was saying yesterday, we have disseminated our preliminary results for mix, where we separately identify indicators that are related to COVID. For example, the internet and computer usage and how they are distributed according to geographical locations and other indicators. But I think for the purpose of today, I think we have to be mindful of a coordination role amongst donors. If they give 40 US dollar per month for Tuvalu's citizens, we might here in Tonga want that initiative. Or we can do an analysis to identify those households who are worse off. From statistics, we did an analysis of in combination with the World Bank, where they have a proxy means test model to identify households where they have poor households to fund the students to go back to classrooms. So we we design a model and we insert some of the conceptual approach indicators to identify those households. But otherwise, I think, generally speaking, and we are here with our team to listen and learn from other countries, but we have yet to decide what we're going to do to assess the impact of the COVID-19. It's complex, and I think a leading role from method board, decide all these methodologies, and I see a lot, like what I said, I've shared a lot of things that I've done in the UK, in the US, Mexico, and even Tuvalu here, and also what World Bank is doing in the PNG and also Solomon Islands. We all put lesson learned and to think about our own context, what areas specifically that we need to assess, and then we can move forward from there. So that's from us now, David, and we will come back with a collective response to some of the specific agenda items. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Viliami. I think you've raised a number of really quite important issues there. And one point that occurs to me is that across the Pacific, we have been very fortunate in that the health impacts have not been perhaps as great as they have been in many other parts of the world. But what we have seen is a much more severe economic impact with our reliance in the region very much on trade, on tourism, on remittances, all of which have been adversely and seriously adversely affected by the pandemic and its impacts in other parts of the world where we've had the travel restrictions and so on. So I think it's really important that we emphasize the need for data, not just in the normal sense of what we're doing, but having up-to-date data, because the impacts have been very short-term. The closing of hotels, the loss of jobs, people have often very little in the way of savings, and those savings can be very quickly used up. So it is important that we try to emphasize the collection of data as much as we can, and that often, as we've said before, means collecting the data that we know is already available within government systems in terms of employment, in terms of government revenues, in terms of the businesses. So I would emphasize the need for making sure that we are doing as much as we can at the NSO level to bring in that data that we know is being collected by other ministries and agencies. But what I'd like now is to move on again, and I can see that we have Arista in Kiribati is on board with us today, and I hope that Arista, you have good connections up in Kiribati, and that you'll be able to give us a perspective from your point of view. Thank you. Arista, can you hear us? Are you there? Perhaps the connection is not so good. So maybe I can ask Andy in Vanuatu. Could we have your perspective on this? Would a central coordination facility be useful for Vanuatu in bringing together all the data on the pandemic and its impacts in Vanuatu? And of course, you've also got the issue of the Cyclone Harold to deal with as well.
Hello.
Oh, Arista, yes. While we've got you on, please carry on. Andy, please just hold off for a moment.
Sorry, I missed a lot of what's been said in the meeting. My connection is not really good today, so I'm not sure what I want to say. But here we have Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you, Arista. And just to say that what we've been talking about this morning is perhaps whether it would be useful for NSOs to have a more coordinating role in the gathering of data to monitor the impacts of the pandemic, and whether it would be useful for SPC or one of the other UN agencies perhaps to coordinate or to facilitate a coordination between the development partners and yourselves in bringing together everyone so that you can make a plan, a more coordinated plan for the data collection that will be needed, that is needed for monitoring the impacts of the pandemic, not so much perhaps on the health side, which is being covered no doubt by your Ministry of Health, but more on the broader economic and social impacts that are affecting individual households, individual people, and the impacts of job losses and so on.
I'm sorry, David, I can't catch all of that. My connection is not really good today.
In a nutshell,
just keep talking. Can you pass I think I have to pass the floor to Vanuatu or someone else, because I'm not sure, I can't hear what you've been saying.
Okay, Arista, we'll come back to you. Andy, could I ask you for your thoughts on this, please?
Sorry, I have to unmute my mic.
Yeah. Okay. Andy, are you there?
Hi, David, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can, Andy. Good morning and welcome.
Hello long you, mo hello long every GS where you lay stop. Thank you very much again for allowing us this opportunity. Unfortunately, my travel was cancelled. So I'm here now with my seniors, Gara and Ben. But I think I would echo the messages given already by GS Tonga Williame and GS Fiji Kemueli. I would agree on a coordination mechanism, but unfortunately, NSO we are a bit tied up at the moment, so this will add more pressure on us. So if we can suggest SPC supporting or playing a leading role here, it would really help us. You know, we have a census coming up, which we have to deliver on, and of course, managing disasters, COVID, and TCR. Therefore, we're not in a position to allow ourselves to lead in any form of coordination at the moment. So that's my only regret from here. I would like to suggest again that the use of administrative data is very vital now. We have seen this because like I've said yesterday, our stimulus package was based on administrative data, data from tax, data from NBF for social protection, and of course you also have monetary policy. But it enables the government to intervene in terms of fiscal policy to help. Not the assessment we have done, especially our macroeconomics team, has put us that GDP would fall to a negative 1.4. So an intervention that we have done now with the stimulus package should leave us around, their prediction is now up to 0.4, so a positive. So, but this was again based on administrative data, the use of administrative data, and it allows us to think ahead in terms of. I'm more interested in the NSDS, the National Strategy for the Development of Statistics. This is where we really have to dig down and tie in, and like Dr. William has mentioned, we must get the NSS on board and get them. So having a good NSDS will allow and will ease up any coordination to do with disasters. Again, the NSDS must also address the issue of disaster response, disaster statistics, or disaster support. This is an area which we, as Vanuatu itself, we will have a new NSDS, and we are working with Paris 21 on this. And the new NSDS, we want in there, it has to address disaster. Vanuatu is now, and it's official, we will have Category 5 cyclones every 5 years, or every 4 to 5 years, more frequent, and probably one every year. So we're not only bombarded with cyclone, but now COVID is there. We also have flooding, we also have volcanoes. So as we have the index from UN has suggested, we are the most vulnerable and at risk. So therefore we have to deal with managing these disasters as well. But on top of that, we have to show that we are able to overcome them, so that we are resilient. So because of this drive, then it has now enabled us to we don't want to delay the census. We want to, every data collection or every activity is planned for this year. Given that we're still COVID-free, it has to happen. But then in terms of, we are now, it's very hard, I mean, for households, NSO has total control over that. We can do household surveys, we can support any development partners, any stakeholders willing to do household surveys. Our recent PDNA survey for TC Harold has shown that we have 100% response. So we can use disaster to our advantage as well. We can use that to say, now it's important to invest in data collection. That leads us to my next point, which is investment in data collection. So disaster itself, for us, we want to use that as the basis for any policy. Has to also set aside investment in data collection, and not giving that opportunity to NSO alone to struggle with looking for funding and trying to coordinate and manage and implement or conduct surveys. So this is very important, and it's very critical that it is embedded into the NSDS. Therefore, the NSDS will take that on board, and all the NSS members are aware that when they draw up policies, they must also include data collection avenues, data collection finance, and data collection support. So this, but in terms of administrative data, because of disaster, Vanuatu has enabled a state of emergency. Therefore, it allowed data sharing of the administrative data. But in good times, everyone will be saying our legislation has limited us or has restricted us in sharing, data sharing. And also, statistics office, NSO has one of most outdated. Therefore, it's very difficult for us to request administrative data, given that we have one of the oldest legislation in the country at the moment. David, I guess I would stop from here now and let other GS also the opportunity to speak. We'd be happy to answer any questions, any queries that does arise. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you very much indeed, Andy. You've raised again a number of interesting points there, particularly around the importance of having a national strategy for the development of statistics, and it's very encouraging to hear that you are now working to update your NSDS and putting that at the forefront of making sure that statistics is itself at the center of the country's need for data. I think also the mention of the recurrence of disasters is an important one, because as we know, across the whole region, we are susceptible and very vulnerable to disasters of many sorts. And the disaster that we have at the moment in terms of the pandemic is one that, in a sense, we have not ever experienced before, where we have lost so much economic activity in such a short space of time. And again, it comes back to the need to make sure that we have robust data gathering systems that can provide us with important economic indicators in the short term. And I note your comment about the legislation in Vanuatu being rather outdated and not permitting the NSO to gather the administrative data. But I think that one of the points is perhaps to offer a coordinating role to other government ministries, because, for example, we know that a lot of this administrative data is being collected. It's just not being made available to those who might find it useful. So it's not so much that the NSO would be required to collect the data, but rather that the collecting ministries, the ministries of finance and so on, would be prepared to share that data. And I think this is something perhaps that, as you say, could be included in the NSDS and get everyone on board so that there is more data sharing of the data that we know is already being collected. Okay, thanks. Now let's see, who else do we have on board? Kelly, I can see that you're on board again, and it would be very interesting once more to hear from you about the issues that you have in Tokelau. So over to you, please. Kelly, are you there? Kelly, just check that you're not on mute if you're trying to speak now. No, I'm afraid Kelly seems to have gone off as well. Ipia, would you like to add anything to this discussion now?
Thank you, David. I think what the previous speakers have raised, I mean, they're all pretty similar in our situation. I think there is the need to look at the current legislation, especially with this new approach, these new rapid assessment approaches that that are being tested out in the field, in the region and elsewhere. There is definitely a socioeconomic impact to the small countries in the Pacific, especially considering the economies of scale, reliance on one specific industry, and also our own reliance on imported products as our staple, such as rice. I think coordination is important, not just in the regional, not just in the sense or the global sense, but also within countries itself. Vanuatu has raised a very good point on what should drive the data collection framework, and I think that's where the ESs come in. Now, probably some of us are still in our infancy when it comes to driving and coordinating the activities or the data collection frameworks or systems within the NSDS as according to our strategies, our statistics strategies. But it is a pathway, I guess, in a sense. It is a pathway for us to take the lead in data collection in our respective countries. In saying that, I think with the issue with COVID-19, it might be the case that every country have different focal points. Here in Nauru, there is a task force that has been assembled or constituted, which is also run run under the Ministry of Health. So perhaps, as I mentioned yesterday or in my emails, that when such a survey comes into play in Nauru, that task force may be given the duties of undertaking that role of data collection with the assistance of Nauru Bureau of Statistics. As I go down the 2 points under the email, in terms of data collection, most of the first point when it comes to the COVID-19 thing, we are mostly reliant on administrative data at the moment, but there is still gaps in those administrative data that we are collecting. The biggest is probably the economic stuff, the impact. So we are at the moment unable to make any solid assessment or near enough assessment of the impacts of COVID-19 socioeconomically within the households. So we are looking to collect that information and also work remotely with our technical partners, specifically for those economic indicators. In saying that, at the moment, because this pandemic is still new in our eyes, and we are inexperienced in tackling this kind of phenomenon, I believe we would like, our position here in Nauru is that we would like headline indicators or markers that we could start collecting to assess our own resilience and vulnerabilities to COVID-19. This should be. So when I say this, we're looking more towards administrative data and indicators or markers that we can start collecting or put into a database so we know our position, we know our vulnerabilities. I've had the opportunity to look at the portal that SDD is currently working on developing, and I think those are good starting points for us to use as benchmarks in our own data collection systems. As for the second point, the plans for any additional COVID-19 rapid assessment data collection, I think I've touched upon that. At the moment, we haven't heard from any development partners interested in running a survey in Nauru, running a rapid assessment survey in Nauru. But I'm still mindful that we are still trying to learn from the experiences of other countries in the region who have undertaken such surveys. As for our ongoing survey activities, I think those are the ones that are suffering. As I mentioned yesterday, our multi-indicator cluster survey is already supposed to be out in the field. However, we haven't gone past stage 2, which is the training of our enumerators due to travel restrictions. So I've just messaged Philip yesterday if we could look at platforms such as this, Zoom or something else, to allow us to undertake that training, so we are more prepared to hit the field running rather than having to wait for another extended period of time. That's regarding the mix. Now we've already had to reschedule our census, our proper census, the big census because we just recently had a mini census. We've had to reschedule our proper census to next year. Then following on to that would be our household income and expenditure survey. My view currently on the timing of our surveys, especially the household income and expenditure survey, my view on that is that we rely a lot on the household expenditure survey to derive poverty measures and other measures of hardship. Now the impact of COVID-19, as you said, David, is very fast. It's a short period of time, but at a high velocity. We would like to be able to do that kind of assessment now to assess the vulnerabilities and resilience and hardship within households now. But unfortunately, we're going to have to wait until 2022 when we do manage to run a heist. But at the same time, the heist model approach requires us to undertake interviews and enumerate households over a period of 1 year. We'd like something faster, and we'd like to do it now, as soon as possible. Now, who will be supporting that development? I'm assuming it would be SDD to look at a rapid assessment, poverty measure, household income and expenditure survey. I'm assuming SDD will take the lead on that in collaboration with other development partners, experts, for countries to be able to undertake such an assessment. I know we've spoken a lot about the impacts of COVID-19, specifically on the health aspects, but it's the economic that is affecting the social aspects of the community is what we want to address as well at the same time. So those are my views at the moment, and I know I raised in my emails, I've raised the issue of administrative data. Some of us, most of the smaller countries, especially the smaller statistical systems or smaller populations or whatever you want to call it, the small Pacific Island countries, administrative data is mostly what we rely on. And I think this is an area where development partners, in coordination with their own efforts or their own experiences, if it's possible, to help the countries coordinate within countries with their respective focal points. As we know, different partners, different agencies, say the United Nations, are broken up into so many sections. So if that coordination can happen at the regional global level within each agency, and have that trickle down at the country level, so that our NSS, National Statistical System, and data source providers or data providers can sit down and coordinate as well. Of course, under the guidelines, under the guidance of the NSDSs and statistical legislations. I think it would be a good start, rather than every agency within the countries working separately with their own development partners and working in silos. COVID-19 presents us with a very good opportunity, as I think Tonga mentioned, and Vanuatu mentioned, to leverage support and enhance the profile or the need for specific statistical information in times of crisis. And I think this is a good platform to start with. And administrative data, as we all know, the statistics office cannot always control the quality of the statistics being collected in other agencies. So that's why most of the time we turn to surveys, because it's far easier for us to control what we do in surveys than what we can control in other ministries. But the importance of, I cannot stress the importance of administrative data more, especially with the small systems in place, because they are more on a day-to-day basis available to everyone. It's just the framework, I think, or whatever it's called, is the framework that can produce those markers that identify our own resilience and vulnerabilities is what is important. And they will also provide the benchmarks for any surveys that will come, any surveys that are needed as well. That's my bits for the time being, David. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ipia. Some very insightful comments there, and thanks very much indeed for those. If we can just move on quickly, because we want to have time for a more open discussion, and I've seen a couple of hands go up, and we'll come to you shortly, Offa. But I can see that Arista is now online and has a video connection. So Arista, you've heard what Ipia has just been saying about the importance of administrative data and the difficulties of conducting surveys in the present circumstances. Perhaps we could ask you to just give us a perspective from Kiribati now, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Arista.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to grab as much as I can from what Ipia has discussed, and I'm not sure how to contribute. So far in Kiribati, we have a COVID-19 committee in place, and we have a few plans for which the government plan for cargo buffer and things like that, which we involved in providing data on how much would they import. And that's today they're still having a meeting, one more meeting is on right now in our boardroom, so I'm not sure what they're discussing today. I'm not part of it today. I'm sure about all the activities within the NSO. We have been trying to carry on as we can, or as much as we can, to something to do with the census. So right now we still have trainees that are still on training. This will be part of the plan for data quality. This will be the data monitoring staff, and after that we'll be working to recruit the interviewers and supervisors, as I mentioned yesterday. But that's the only plan that we have now, and I think with our plan for the NSTS, it will have to be in 2021 when we are doing I think it will go as well as the other project from the World Bank, which is institutional strengthening, and that is part of the next highs, which will be later on in 2023 and 2024. So at the beginning of 2021, I think that's when we'll try and do the NSDS, because right now I don't think if the flight begins, then we might plan, but already now that we are in this situation, I believe that maybe we can start that in 2021. But right now we are just concentrating on the census. That's about it from my end. Thank you everyone.
Thank you very much, Arista.
Hello.
I think that that you're in this similar situation, that you have not had any COVID cases in Kiribati, but there is clearly an economic impact that needs to be closely monitored, and I understand that there have been a number of job losses in some of your private sector enterprises in Kiribati, and this is obviously having an effect on the level of hardship and poverty that is being experienced by many of the people in Kiribati. So it's a case of trying to look at ways in which we can capture that sort of data, and this is where I think the high frequency phone monitoring program that we are working with alongside the World Bank might come in useful to provide some more up-to-date information on what's actually happening at the household level. And that's something perhaps we can talk to you about, and it's also something that I think we can talk with IPEA about in more detail, because I think that would also help to meet the requirements that Nauru have in terms of understanding more exactly what the impacts are at the household level. Let's just move on again. I can see that we have Taggy and Jim hopefully in the Cook Islands. So could I please ask you to just make a few comments on what we've been discussing so far? Thank you.
Kia ora, everyone, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, Taggy, we can hear you, and welcome this morning.
Kia ora, everyone, this is Jim from the Cook Island Stats Office.
Jim, sorry.
No worries, David. So we've got Taggy and Lua here with me, and listening into the conversation, there's been some great points. For us, we'll like to specifically talk about, I guess the first point was whether you thought that there'd be any value in having a roundtable discussion with donors. I think on paper that's a great idea for going forward. In terms of what's going on the ground level, though, we've experienced a lot of interpersonal conflicts amongst the coordinating agencies. There's a lot of power struggles for data, and I guess they see this COVID situation as an excuse that to grab, for example, requests for census microdata straight from us, when we've often told stakeholders that's not possible, or other stakeholders requesting medical data from the Ministry of Health. So everyone's been a bit touchy about sharing data now and working in their own silos. So that's sort of one of the issues I see in terms of getting a centralized, coordinated role to bring the data together in this central repository. But in going forward, I guess that's where I see the value of bringing the donors in on this and having sort of a regional perspective, and probably subject matter experts as well. So I think what we really need is to prioritize what data is needed to make these economic social impact assessments, and I guess have someone as a a neutral facilitator or impartial third party there to assist with the discussions. So we do see value for that. And in terms of what we like in the Cook Islands, looking at the tool that was presented yesterday, the World Bank's Rapid Assessment Survey using CATI, I think that's probably one of the best ways to go forward. We don't have COVID in our country right now, but it should be integrated as a plan B. So I think the use of CATI, if it is with survey solutions, could go a long way in providing rapid response data that's needed to do the analysis. I think that's the gist of how we see the situation in the Cook Islands. My colleagues have anything to add? No, I think that's pretty much it, David. Thank you from the Cook Islands.
Thank you very much indeed, Jim and Taggy in Cook Islands. I think again, what you've mentioned there very much supports what's been said by the other government statisticians, that there is a need for more coordination and more willingness to share data when we face disasters of whatever kind that might be. Okay. So I see that Tonga has their hand up. So could we go back to Tonga? Viliami, please.
Thank you, David. Just would like to suggest a way forward if possible. I think what's key here is to come up with some good questions to be asked, whether it's a rapid assessment or whatever, but we should do some exercise before our next meeting to see what sort of area that we need to assess in terms of the impact of the pandemic. As you know from various literature, we have household pulse survey that addresses a lot of issues, and then we can talk to our planning officers and also our line ministries whether there is a need to assess our employment status, the food security, the housing security, the education disruption, the physical and the mental well-being, the income and the food deprivation. And in addition to what Chief Naru was saying, we can also insert a simple assessment of the impact of the COVID-19 towards the household deprivation or the household poverty. It's not necessarily that we have to wait for a long collection from the household income and expenditure survey. You can get tap into that underlying construct by a simple module. And we can also do that in reflecting from the framework of the SDGs. It's not something that we can come up with, but something that has been demanded to us by the SDGs. So I think if we can do a national collaborations within our NSS and especially our national planning to see what are the demands in terms of the COVID. And that will help us in statistics officers to make sure that we place our position in the right place in terms of data collection towards the COVID-19. As I said earlier, there are a lot of initiatives here in Tonga that we never have any work collaborations with them. And simply I can say they were not based on data. These interventions are coming based on some personal assessment. But I think it's necessary for us to step up and see proactively to our users and see whether there is a need from government to produce this timely data for their decision making. Not only that, but I also think we need also to design some questions so that we can assess the social programs and some of the interventions that are mobilizing towards these households or towards these businesses. And I think it's also part of the thing that we might think about. It's not to assess the impact of COVID-19 only pre or post or the current current situation, but we also need to see whether we can assess also the interventions that that government is currently doing and how. But I think what I'm trying to say is that we need to do some assessment on our own individual countries. What are the type of questions that we need? And if those questions are possibly answered by the administrative data, and that's where the administrative data comes in, and we can discuss from the NSS how we can improve, like the data sharing policy that we are trying to impose here in Tonga. That might be helpful for the Cook Islands. If you think that your sectors are not complying with the data by law, and we can start discussing these issues that come up. We should have a data sharing policy or maybe a data flow system or whatever. But I think we also have to be mindful about the data that we collected. Who's going to own the data? And I think it's crucial that we as a national government should own the data that we collected, and also how the development partners will aid us, or how they're going to be assisting us financially or whatever, or technical. But I think also we need to appreciate the governance of our Pacific hubs, and also our method board, and also our Pacific Standing Committee. With due respect, I don't think I have a right to say something about pilot agreement. But I think for us here in Tonga, we cannot do something separate by our own. We need to know what is our stand in terms of our governance from the method board and also the standing committee. And I hope in the near future we will convene these committees and we can assess what countries will bring, hopefully, if you agree, and when they put these questionnaires and these thematic areas, we can say this might be a compulsory, appropriate, because more than 10 countries in the Pacific are giving their hands up. They need something to assess their employment status or their food security or whatever. But from us, we have to discuss it thoroughly. Next time, we will provide you more feedback on from our team. But we thank you so much, David, for making this initiative to get our feedback.
Thank you very much indeed, Viliami. Some very, very important points there. And just to confirm that we will be holding a methods board meeting in about 3 weeks' time, early in July, and many of the points that you have raised will be on the agenda for that. And we will also be planning to hold a standing committee, statistics standing committee meeting later in the year in place of the HOPS meeting, which, as I mentioned yesterday, we are now rescheduling to the first quarter of 2021. So we are very conscious of the importance of maintaining a strong lead in data governance and making sure that the data is properly secured and curated, and that the ownership does always rest with the national administrations. I saw that Offa had her hand up. Offa, did you wish to say, to make an intervention here, please?
Very much, David, and thank you for the time. And I think Viliami, the Deputy Chair of the Methods Board, have mentioned a lot of what I wanted to say. But I just wanted to remind the Pacific Government Statistician and Development Partners that there is a Methods Board developed to safeguard the Pacific in terms of data governance, quality, and ownership. And I think all this discussion, the chair of the Methods Board would have liked to sit here, but he's unable to. So I just want to reiterate to the Pacific region that you have a Methods Board that you can go to if you are unsure what's going on. I think that's my first point. The second point, it's very clear from some of the presentation that there are incentives given out to the respondents, such as food basket, phone card, money. how is that going to impact the National Stats Office when they implement the duty of collecting official data in their own country? It's definitely going to impact them when they have to ask for the support of the respondents. So that's something that I believe should be taken up in the methods board. There is inconsistency the way some of the partners are approaching the country. The other point that I just want to ask, which is what Viliami have raised, who will own and hold the data from all these rapid assessment survey? The NSO, it's very clear, have very minimal or no involvement in some of these survey. And I agree with the Deputy Chair of the Methods Board, NSO should be given and should be allowed to view and hold a copy of all the final data set coming out from this survey. My final comment is that I've spoken with Kemueli in Tokelau this morning, and he is keen to participate in the World Bank Rapid Assessment Survey, but he's asking States New Zealand to help them redevelop the questionnaire so it's suitable for Tokelau. And we are currently doing the same thing with the Cook Island. Those are my comments, and unfortunately Vince is not here, but he looked forward to see a discussion of all the issues raised today at the Methods Board. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Offer. I think those points are all very well taken, and many of them, well, in fact, all of them will be addressed during the forthcoming Methods Board meeting before we actually hit the field with any further of these high-frequency phone monitoring surveys. I'd just like to pass now to Kemueli, the Director of SDD here, who would like to make a few observations on what we've discussed so far. And then I think we'll throw the floor open, because I can see that we have a number of development partners as well as donors on board, and perhaps it would be a good opportunity for them to give their perspective on what we've been discussing this morning. So first of all, Kemueli, please.
Thank you, David, and thank you to everyone for participating in these important discussions. We were really encouraged with the discussions that we're having, because we've been asked a lot of times about what we are doing about the meeting the data requirements post COVID and the impact. I guess we are now better placed to plan ahead, given that we've heard from the development partners in the countries, and a lot of lessons have been learned, and which can shape the way we go forward. Coordination is important, because we really need to avoid duplication, and of course the challenge of minimizing the respondent burden. For us, the way ahead at the moment to ensure that we get the most current information is the high frequency phone monitoring. Of course, there are governance requirements that we need to meet, but we really need to aim for a core set of questions. Some things that were highlighted by Viliami and other speakers. Also, given the varying demands for data from the partners, what we need to agree on is a kind of a survey strategy that offers a methodologically sound means of including the different questions in the different rounds. That is something that we really need to discuss with the experts, but we are thankful that we will learn a lot from the World Bank experience in the Solomons and PNG, and then that will guide us in some of the decisions that we need to take, as well as inform us of how they've dealt with some of the concerns that we have. I was interested in the questions that you included in your post-disaster assessment survey, Andy. That would give us some ideas of the relevant questions that we need to ask. The sharing by the different countries, a lot of lessons have been learned, the use of admin data, what is available, and how useful this can be. We've been hearing a lot of anecdotal accounts of workers returning to their villages in Fiji. We've heard experiences from different countries about how useful mobile data can be to give us an indication of population distribution. So as Andy had said, disasters opens up opportunities. So this could be an opportunity to try and gather that kind of information, see how useful it is. And the information demands, as well as the incentives offer that you mentioned, I've always been thinking of that as the way towards the future. With all these surveys that need to be conducted, these are things that we need to discuss as well. What incentives do we offer to the respondents to ensure that they cooperate with us in our surveys? Those are some of the things that we need to discuss, and I'll hand back to David.
Thank you very much, Kemueli, for those very pertinent comments. As I said, we do have a number of development partners and donors on board this morning, and I'd like to throw the floor open to them. Oh, sorry, I can see that Samoa has raised their hand. So perhaps SBS, over to you for the moment before we throw the floor open. Leota, if you're on there, I think you're still on mute.
Can you hear us, Steve?
Yep, we can see you and we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Well, thanks, David. As we mentioned earlier that Bono is not available, but maybe we can provide what we can for the discussion this morning based on the topics being discussed. And in terms of the coordination, I think we've been coordinating with partners, especially the UN system, because they have been very active in trying to get some information on the COVID-19 impact, both on the employers or the business community, the household, as well as employees. As we all share that there was a very big impact on the employees, especially in the tourism industry, which there's so much interest in that perspective. So we've been part of that coordinating unit, despite the fact that the resources within the Bureau cannot afford to accommodate the need for those surveys. So what we did was we used the other sources. For example, like we coordinate with the Ministry of Commerce, Industry and Labour, which is the focal point of the ILO, as well as the workers' union in conjunction with a TA to conduct that survey for Samoa. And I think that in terms of sharing, I think we will request a data set from that survey. In terms of the impact on the existing collections, I have to say that there was an impact, in particular our agriculture census, which have been delayed for over a month because of the lockdown in Samoa. So it's continuing now, and we're hoping to finish it in the next 5 to 6 weeks. We discussed it yesterday, and it seems like there's a need for additional 2 weeks for that survey. All the other surveys are pending at this point in time. I think we're still gonna go with the population census next year, but preparations for the population census next year is still going on later on in the last half of this year. In terms of additional COVID-19 rapid assessment data collections, there was a survey, an online survey that was conducted by the UN, which mainly focused on Samoa, which the questions we responded to is basically based on at a household level, but basically limited to the people living in Samoa. So we can say that the coordination within the UN is also really good at the time, because in the first place we were loaded with so many requests from different UN systems like the UNICEF, our UNDP here, the ILO, the FAO, and all those institutions. And having discussed it with them, I think now they've come to the fact that they had to coordinate themselves first. In terms of the use of administrative data, it's very, very important, especially at this point in time. There is I think administrative data will be key in developing some indicators at different domains, in particular the economic statistics, which in Samoa has been using a lot of admin data over so many years. And as I mentioned yesterday, that we've just released 2 days ago our quarterly GDP for March, which has very little impact of the COVID, except for the measures that affected Samoa. But coming June, I think that's when we get a lot of information in place so that we can use. Other administrative data like the common revenues, common expenditures, as well as the employment from others, from the National Provident Fund. They are very good information, and we have been challenged for us to produce those informations more in a more advanced way, not 3 months after the period as we usually conduct it. So that's more like a challenge for us at this point in time. In terms of the coordination amongst with the statistical system, I think it's very, very important in a way that everyone is aware of what's going on, not only from the bureau's perspective, knowing what's needed at the sector level, but also what's needed at the national level. Recently, we just completed a voluntary national report for the SDG 2030, which we heavily involved in providing information and also verifying some other indicators from other sectors, which were part of this very, very important report. Secondly, we have been very active in the development of sector plans, in which we were part of the evaluation and monitoring framework in providing indicators for those for various sectors. As David may be aware that there are about 14 to 15 sectors, and we've been very active in that sense. Even with the Ministry of Finance is coordinating the new national plan, or the Samoa's strategy for the development. So we're looking at having a very new one coming up, and the SBS also have been heavily involved in as part of that development. So looking ahead, and having that sort of looking ahead in terms of development, we've heard a lot of issues and a lot of challenges over so many years, but I would like to share the very, very important initiative that has been shared recently during the SCAP Region Statistics Week. And the very important part of it was that integrated statistics for integrated analysis, which encompasses the combination of that statistics for policy decision making. And that with the limited resources that we are looking that we can tap our hands on. I think it's very, very important now that we look at how we do things, looking at how to maximize the use of admin data, and also looking at integrating various surveys in such a way that we can maximize the use of those survey results. I think that's as we are about to complete our current strategy for the development of statistics, I think it's something that we will consider having a look at it, which is integrated statistics for integrated analysis, and that will be part of the SDG 2030 last leg, which is very, very important. I think that's from us, and I'm sure Connor would also share some additional views should she have later on through emails. As we said earlier, that Connor is engaged in the Parliament meeting at this point in time. Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much indeed, Leota. I think that, again, very, very useful comments from Samoa. And I think it would be fair to say that Samoa has been one of the leaders in ensuring that administrative data is incorporated into their national account system. And I think that that is a model that could be looked at by other government statisticians around the region. I'd like now to invite Teresa Dickinson from ABS to say a few words. It's great to have the opportunity to invite one of our partners from Australia to speak. So Teresa, over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, David. Thank you, Apelli. It's wonderful that this meeting's happening. I think it's very opportune. I'm well aware, looking at those of you who are on video, it is 0 degrees in Canberra right now. And I'm looking at a number of you in your short sleeve shirts and wishing that we could have this meeting in any one of your countries rather than virtually. I've very much enjoyed hearing about the different situations that you're all facing. And I think that there's a real richness there of specific things that are pertinent to each country, but also a lot of commonality in the need to understand the quite dramatic changes in economic and social circumstances that you're experiencing, despite nearly all of the Pacific being COVID-free. One aspect that occurs to me, particularly on the topic of rapid surveys, is that we were able to deploy rapid surveys quickly because we were prepared to simplify. And simplify doesn't mean trade off a lot of statistical quality necessarily, but it does mean looking to have short surveys with largely untested questions sometimes. It means using panels of respondents that are already known to you, perhaps, rather than doing a fully randomised sampling scheme from scratch. And one of the aspects that interested me as we were talking yesterday and today was the degree to which simplification was not necessarily front of mind. Some of the early presentations yesterday talked about simplification off some already quite well structured and perhaps very rigorous approaches. So there was some simplification off a high level of rigour. I think for those of you that really are aspiring to rapid, as in with weeks and maybe a few months, and are feeling that your countries need that information and you have ministries calling on you for that information, a lot of simplification is going to be necessary. And that also relates to simplification in coordination and arrangements with donors. And to that end, I know that Australia, that DFAT, have quite rapidly pivoted their priorities towards COVID-related support, and that applies to their statistical work as well. So ABS, with our bilateral arrangements that we have with some of you, but also through the Leadership Forum, are able and willing to realign, rework the program to be as responsive to your current needs as we possibly can be. And that includes through Methods Board, through sharing the work that we've done on our rapid surveys with all of you. Whatever we can do that supports your current efforts to respond, we will do our very best. And I guess that's all I wanted to say is two things. If you want speed, you are going to have to simplify, and probably simplify more than you might realise. And as I say, simplify does not necessarily mean compromise statistical accuracy to unacceptable levels. And you're going to have to simplify on and speed up on arrangements to put these sort of surveys in place. And Australia is ready and willing to help where we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Teresa. Some very wise words there in terms of making sure that we don't try and overcomplicate the collection of data in these untried and new circumstances. That's very useful comments, and I think that that is something that has perhaps even come home to our colleagues at the World Bank, as Kristen mentioned yesterday morning. What we thought was a 15-minute questionnaire actually turned out to be a 45-minute questionnaire almost in PNG, and 25 minutes in the Solomon Islands. So it does emphasize the need to think carefully about what questions we can ask and what we can get in the required time. So that's something that I think we can think about when we come to discuss these issues at the Methods Board, and obviously it's something that Offer has also raised. Could I ask if there are any other donors or partners who would like to contribute on that, because it's obviously a very important point that Teresa has made in terms of the coordination and the development of any questionnaires that we might want to be suggesting to NSOs for collecting pandemic related information. Is there anyone who would like to contribute? Please just raise your hand or turn your video on.
Hi Mike. Hi David, it's Raj from Milo. Can I make a comment please?
Yes, Raj, please go ahead.
Thank you colleagues. Based on what we've been discussing over the last 2 days, I really see that we all are committed to making sure that we take a coordinated approach in collecting data. And this is something I hope that in the near future we will have. I think another important thing is when we're trying to coordinate this communication amongst our partners is very, very important, which many of you have raised already. Resources, as you have mentioned, is another issue. We would like to support as many countries as possible and try to include our surveys in probably in few other surveys, rather than taking many different surveys. We take one survey, but also trying to complement each other. Timelines, this is something that we all need to work on. I think like our SPC colleagues, with the resources they have, with the resources we have, and of course the resources at the country level, we need to have some realistic timelines in making sure that we are able to meet these timelines. Sometimes we try to push countries to undertake some surveys, or sometimes they push us to provide support in undertaking the surveys. But if the timelines are agreed from the beginning, well defined, it will provide a lot of support in taking these surveys. One thing for the ILO, in which at least for the Fiji we had some struggle, and once we take this assessment in any other countries we do understand will be a struggle, is in our case we work very closely with our tripartite partners, the employers, workers and the government, and the capacity for them to undertake surveys is very, very low. And this is where we would request the support from Statistics Office. And I mean, most of the time we do rely so much on our Statistics Office, but I think there has to be an approach not only by ILO, but all of us is making sure that we provide the capacity of our partners to be able to undertake this survey and be able to work with the Statistics Office and understand what are the structure or the skeleton of a survey really is. In many cases, our partners don't really understand how a survey needs to be run, what's the need for that, and for us to explain all this, and by the time you really undertake the survey, you have lost a lot of time. So I think capacity building, not only for our statistics offices, but our partners is very, very important at this stage as well. And of course, we would, as much as possible, appreciate the support from our statistical departments, offices in the various countries. But in many countries, what happens is many agencies take their own surveys with their own partners without too much collaboration, without the statistics office, which makes it difficult for either of the parties to collaborate towards the end of it. So I think from the beginning, if we are able to undertake this, would be really, really helpful. Thank you. I think that's all for me. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much indeed, Raj. I think you've hit on a number of important points about the coordination aspects and making sure that that the NSO is at the centre of any data collection by any particular agency or even within the governments themselves, to make sure that there is adequate coordination and cooperation. Is there anyone else that would like to contribute before we? Mei-Lin, I can see you have your hand up, so please, the floor is yours.
Hello from Wellington. Actually, it's not freezing today, unlike Canberra. I'll make this short and hopefully useful. First of all, I'd like to commend SPC. I think it's great to see you in your system leader and coordination role, the way in which you organized this meeting, this last minute meeting, so rapidly with such great response from the NSOs and the development partner is itself impressive. I think we've been very interested in this discussion and looking forward to contributing to this initiative. If we are sure that this is going to be Pacific-led and owned, not driven by specific development partners for their own purposes. So I think this is a very important principle to MFET. It is a key agenda item in the upcoming FEM meeting. I don't know if that's been discussed. I might have missed it at this meeting. The agenda item on a crop-led social impact assessment of COVID. I think it's probably more a high-level stock-taking analysis given the volume of stuff that's already happening. But that's important to us. And the other thing that we'd like to see that you can somehow arrive at with the guide of the methods board, an approach that is sound, not overly complicated, but ethical and fit for purpose for this region. And finally, that it is supported by a budget that is also sound, and maybe the methods board will have a role in appraising the budget so it's transparent and it's clear which bit goes to which party in the equation. But with that, I think this is a very promising initiative. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mei-Lin. I would just add that we at SPC have sort of facilitated this in conjunction and collaboration with our UN colleagues in Fiji. But above all, I have to acknowledge that it was at the primary suggestion of IPEA in Nauru that really was the catalyst to get all this going. So credit where where credit is due on this. But it's great to have been able to get so many people together to discuss these really important issues. So while the floor is open, and before we try and sum up and try and keep to time as much as possible today, is there anyone else that would like to make a few remarks? I don't see any other hands going up, and I don't see anybody's video flashing on. So maybe we should, since we are nearly at our 2-hour time limit, maybe we should just wait. I see Andrew. Andrew, over to you at ABS.
Thanks, David. Hopefully you can hear and see me. I just wanted to just jump in here while we've got the chance, because I know you did mention this yesterday about some countries having issues with prices. Talking about the prices challenges given the fact there's stock outs and things like that with measuring CPI. We are looking to set up a workshop in the next couple of weeks, and hopefully we can do that through you, David, because unfortunately our Zoom or tech platforms don't really work well out of the ABS. So hopefully we can get up going through you. But setting up a workshop with countries, with their prices teams to help just provide some advice and work through some issues on the CPI that'll hopefully get you through the next few months. So just wanted to put that there for government statisticians to hear, and we'll follow up with an email in the coming weeks. Thanks.
Okay, great. Thanks very much indeed for that, Andrew. It is something that was raised yesterday by a couple of our government statistician colleagues, and it is something that I think has had them scratching their heads as how they deal with the current stock outs and lack of economic activity. So that would be really great. Just going back to what Mei Lin has said. We are aware of the analysis that is being done, being led by the Forum Secretariat, and we are at SDD anyway. We are working with both the Forum Secretariat and with the UN system, and sharing whatever data we have that might be useful to them in their broad regional overviews. And I think this is where we have been trawling through the websites of NSOs, of ministries of finance, of national provident funds, of power authorities, to try and see what administrative data we can get from those various sources and put together. And we will be sharing what we have been able to find with you all in the next few days. We have just received some up-to-date information from Vanuatu yesterday from the Ministry of Finance, and we're just incorporating that into the database that we're trying to build. And we also had some, as Leota mentioned, we've recently got some additional information from Samoa, from their quarterly updates. So we will be sharing that information with you all in the next couple of days, I hope. And that will, I think, show how the impact of the pandemic in the first quarter, as Leota has said, was not very significant. It starts to really show in the latter part of March for those countries where we have data for the month of March. But what we will see is a very significant change in April and through the second quarter. And I think that this is where it is really going to be important that all government statisticians try to capture as much of this administrative data as they can for the second quarter, because it will be telling a rather drastic story of the economic impacts. So perhaps with that we can move just to, I'll try and sum up a few things that I think that we can take out of this discussion over the last couple of days. I think first of all is the importance of using the administrative data. This has been mentioned by myself certainly a number of times, but has also been reiterated by many of our government statisticians, and that has been, I think, a highlight that we should all try and take. I think the second point that we should all think about is the issue of coordination and the need to make sure that development partners and agencies that are keen to conduct surveys do coordinate with the NSO. Even if the survey might not necessarily directly involve the NSO, it is very important that the data is made available and that the NSO knows what's going on, so that all the data can be collected. And I think we take on board here Teresa's point that don't make things too complicated. Try and keep things as simple as possible within the framework of sound statistical practices. I think the other thing is that it will be really great to continue this this dialogue that we've established over the last couple of days. Maybe we can try and hold such a dialogue maybe on a monthly or a couple of monthly basis, and we'll be in touch with you all to see how we can perhaps facilitate that going forward, to try and keep that information flow going and to keep the overall coordination between partners, donors and all the NSOs, so that there is a forum for them to share their views and their concerns and challenges on a regular basis, because I think there has been a lot learned from the NSOs exchanging views today, and that's been a really great opportunity that we haven't really tried and tested before. And I think that on this occasion it has showed that this is a really useful facility that we now have, and we can bring everybody together. And finally, I'd just like to say that we have shared with all the government statisticians the concept note on the high frequency phone monitoring surveys that, as we heard yesterday, are currently being carried out, particularly by the World Bank in PNG and the Solomons. And we do think that these do offer an opportunity for collecting data on a longitudinal basis over the next 12 months that will really add to the knowledge of what is happening to the economies and to the individuals and households and families in each country. We obviously have a lot to learn from the work that the World Bank is doing, but I think that there are some very good lessons there. And I think that if we use those lessons and also take the advice of Teresa to make sure that we don't overcomplicate things, that we will be able to get an enormous amount of very useful data. Now, I accept that there are some government statisticians who are still very nervous about this, but I think that once we have had an opportunity to discuss it in more technical detail at the methods board in a couple, 3 weeks time, that hopefully many of those concerns will be addressed, and that we will be able to work with donors to secure the necessary funding to make those surveys happen. We've seen a lot of innovations over the last couple of years in terms of the ways that surveys have been conducted in the region, particularly using the CAPI system and the recall system that came out of the work that was done by Mike Sharp and his team in RMI, and this has been used in Kiribati and in Vanuatu. And I think this is something that demonstrates that if we're prepared to embrace innovation, we can actually make things a lot more efficient and a lot more cost effective, and produce data on a much more timely basis. And I think that this is one of the things that has been emphasized too, that we need to have up-to-date and timely information when we are in an emergency situation, as we have been here over the last few months with the pandemic, but also in terms of the Cyclone Harold that affected Vanuatu and Solomons and Fiji and Tonga in recent times. So having made those few comments, I'd just like to now throw the floor to IPEA and to our colleagues at the UN, I think, who were going to provide a few wrap-up remarks. Are you there with that one, Chris?
Thank you, David.
Oh, yes, sorry. That's Sanaka.
Sir.
Okay, please carry on.
I'm sorry, David. Are you referring to me or Chris Ryan?
Oh, sorry. Is that it? I can't see your.
Okay. Can you see me?
Oh, okay. Well, yes. Sorry, this Chris that's on the video. Please carry on.
Okay. Thank you, David. Colleagues from around the region. David was making reference to the World Bank study in the region. Let me just inform the meeting that the United Nations Development Program in Papua New Guinea has just completed a nationwide survey on the socioeconomic impact assessment of COVID-19, especially on the measures taken to prevent the spread of the virus. It's been since beginning of April, and we just concluded it, and the report should be out by next week. It's a very representative sample. It's about 8,000 households and 3,000 firms, and for Papua New Guinea, that's quite significant. And we've gone to all the 19 districts in the country and the 22 provinces, including Arab. So everyone's excited to see the outcome of the report. Once it's tabled, we will have it online and share with others who are interested. So thanks, Dave. Just an update.
Okay, Chris, thank you very much indeed. Sorry, I understand that we were hoping that that either Sanaka or Yosefa from ESCAP would close the meeting, but say a few final remarks. But thanks for your intervention. IPEA, could I ask you just to say a few closing remarks, and then I'll ask Epeli to just come on and close the meeting for today. So IPEA, if you could just say a few words to sum up. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, David. Just to sum up a few of the issues. I mean, coordination has always been the issue since day one. But it's interesting to note there are a few common issues as well, and other interesting proposals or developments that are coming in from the countries. Of course, a lot of emphasis has gone towards administrative data. I suppose this is because we don't have to wait too long to start collecting that data or improve upon that. We can do it ourselves at the moment in our respective countries. The appropriateness of the context or the data that we collect, that it should be based upon our own specific circumstances. The other issue is how do we identify the vulnerable populations or households at the moment when we haven't undertaken these surveys yet, these rapid assessment surveys. Economic data is certainly an issue with all of us, which specifically links to the administrative data. When it comes to trade and that, I suppose we can leverage this, or we can work with each other as we are doing with with our colleagues in ABS or counterparts in ABS, Fiji, Solomons, and New Zealand, where we share mirror data. This is in light of food security issues that we are facing, shortages in shops and those kind of things. So we depend a lot on mirror data to look at our own imports. I think it is important, as mentioned, the degree of simplification of the current methodologies and also the coordination. I mentioned earlier about the need to probably look at the current methodology of collecting household income and expenditure data over a long-term period and perhaps tailor it so we can have a rapid assessment sort of to acquire information on poverty and hardship within the households. If there is no other information available, then we go out to the field. The viability of the face-to-face interviews is still out there, since I believe most of the Pacific Island countries are still COVID-free, as well as there are no restrictions in place for social social distancing and such. So the viability of those face-to-face interviews is still there, but the continuation of that work has currently either ceased or have been delayed. Part of the issues that we might encounter, I believe, with the rapid assessment surveys, the phone surveys, we would have to look at our legislations, look at the ethical concerns or issues on collecting information over the phone because of issues that may address confidentiality, and also the problem that we may encounter when we randomly select a number and that number belongs to a minor. So these are some of the things I look forward to hearing some more about the integration of statistics and the integration of, and integrated analysis issues, especially concerning a lot of the survey activities or administrative data that have not yet been integrated or under the statistics office activities. So the results of that, those kind of integration is very important for policy and planning. And I think every government should look at it holistically rather than siloed. The governance of the data has been raised, and I think that will be on the agenda of the methods board. And I commend the speakers who have raised that, because this has always been an issue when we deal with confidential information on medical information, trade information, business information, those kind of things. I think this is an important issue as well. And of course, the ownership of the data, I agree, should remain with the countries. Now there is going to be a lot of impact, maybe not yet for most of the Pacific Island countries, but we know that how vulnerable we are as small island states on the impacts or external impacts that we experience, either economic impacts, natural disasters, and even such situation as, the lack of tourists arriving at your doorsteps. So, in short, I think Michael Sharp has posted to everyone in his message in the messages. I think that's a good way forward as well for us to start thinking about. I mean, there are situations now in our own situations, I mean, where we can still undertake surveys. However, we expect delays. So it may not be as urgent for some of us to undertake a rapid assessment survey or a phone survey or such and such. But it is always good to be prepared and put in a plan B just in case. So I would like to thank everyone's contribution to today. And I just forgot one point. What MFAD raised is also a very good point in looking at a sound approach and also budget appraisal. And I think this will be also on the agenda of the Methods Board. Okay, I'd just like to close by saying again, thank you to everyone. Thank you to development partners, SDD for making it happen, and all the Pacific NSOs, government statisticians in contributing to this first step in trying to tackle this common threat. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for those very helpful summing up words, Ipir. I'd just now like to pass to Epeli again to close this meeting and to thank you all once again for your participation. So over to Epeli.
Thank you everyone for your participation, and first of all, thank you to EPA for initiating this discussion. I'm sure you'll all agree that it has gone really well. The information sharing objective of this meeting has gone well, and we've learned a lot from each other. And we all know that we have gained so much from what was shared by the development partners as well as the government statisticians and the senior statisticians who participated in the meeting. And I'm sure that the information that we have now will shape the way forward for us. And a lot needs to be done, but we need to continue talking. And the emphasis on admin data, we cannot emphasize much more, but to say that we rely on you government statisticians to really maximize the use of the admin data that you have available. I've always been fascinated by how your national accountants come up with the assumptions, with the partial data that they have. So a lot of deep thinking needs to go into this kind of work to ensure that we are able to supply the relevant information that our countries need right now. So thank you once again for the development partners for your presentation and the input from all the government statisticians, so valuable. And we will continue with this dialogue as we try and confirm the way forward in the coming weeks. So best wishes in your work, and keep working hard. You play a very, very important role in this COVID crisis. Thank you, and Vina Kapakaleu.
Thank you very much indeed, Epeli, and thank you again to everyone, to all those who've contributed over the last couple of days, to the presenters and to those who have spoken, especially to our government statisticians. It's been really great to have so many of you on board, and yep, have a good weekend, and thanks very much indeed, and we'll speak to you all again in the not too distant future. Thanks very much.